Welcome, everyone. My name is Don Schiefelbein. I'm a farmer and cattle producer from Kimball, Minnesota. I also serve as the president-elect of National Cattlemen's Beef Association this year. I am pleased to welcome each of you to our webinar series focused on soils, forage, and grazing tonight. We are extremely proud to be partnering on this series with experts from across the country who serve at places like Gallagher, Barenbrug, and AgriWebb, and many fine land-grant universities, and also many producers that have been recognized as outstanding stewards of land, forage, and cattle. As a participant tonight, your line will be muted, but feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen during the webinar, and at the end of the presentations, we will get to as many of those as time will allow. If you are having trouble with your technology, or if you are joining us only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days at ncba.org. Just look for the producer tab on the website. The webinar tonight, titled Forages, Stretching Your Grazing Resources, will feature two outstanding presenters. First will be Luke Wilson, who is the Marketing Development Manager for Barenbrug USA. Barenbrug is an international family-owned seed company that has been breeding, producing high-quality grasses, legumes for over 110 years. Luke also carries his passion for forages and cattle onto his family farm in central Iowa. We want to give a special thanks to Barenbrug for sponsoring this webinar tonight. Following Luke will be Johnny Rogers, Amazing Grazing Coordinator at North Carolina State University. Johnny and his wife own and operate Rogers Cattle Company. He spends time working with farmers as they improve their grazing resources, and in 2010 was recognized as the North Carolina Environmental Stewardship Award recipient. Johnny also spends his spare time managing and being president of the Red Angus Association of America. Now, as we go into the webinar tonight, Luke, the floor is yours.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I want to say thank you to NCBA for putting on this webinar series. There's lots of great topics and great education, and a great way to get it out to the producers, especially in this interesting times where we seem to be at home a little more than not. And I don't know about you, but I really look forward to seeing everybody in Nashville in August at the NCBA convention. And if you're there, feel free to stop by Barenbrug's booth and say hi. But Barenbrug, we're very thankful to be able to sponsor this event. And like Dan said, Barenbrug has been in the grass and forage seed business for over 115 years now. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is stretching your grazing resources. And when I think of that, what are the two biggest resources in grazing? Look at that, we have water. Well, water, it was discussed in the earlier webinar a couple weeks ago. It's critical to the success of a grazing operation. It's actually key, but I'm not a plumber, so I'm not going to be focusing on that part as much as I am going to be focusing on the feed, the forage part. So as we put the focus on the forage part of it, there we go. We're going to go through it by position it, selecting it, and managing it. And when we talk about positioning it, we're talking about putting the proper species in the proper environment, the proper growing season to help fulfill the grazing resources. And then when we talk about selecting it, we're going to be talking about selecting those varieties within the species that best fit your needs. And then last, I'll just hit on the tip of managing it, but it'll be a good roll in to Mr. Johnny Rogers. We'll talk a lot more about the management side. So position it. Like I said, where are we putting these species to help stretch our grazing resources? And when we look at this, we look at our forages. All forages have distinct seasonal growth curves, and they cannot meet the feed demand of a grazing animal throughout the year. If we look on to that graph on the right, we're going to see a typical cool season grass growth curve. We have lush spring growth followed by a summer slump, and then to the right, we have the fall growth. What we're looking at is how can we plan for those seasonal forage deficits? Where can we pinpoint where we lack forage and what can we fill it in with? And obviously the seasonal growth curves are going to vary by location. So we'll just start across America. The high majority of the pastures out there are going to be a cool season grass and a legume type. So we're going to punch in what that growth curve is going to look like. Here we're using a tall fescue. We're going to say our optimal base forage is going to be Bar Optima Plus E34. So we look at the growth curve just like we saw on the previous slide, and we see that lush spring growth followed by the summer slump and then a little bit of forage growth into the fall. What can we add? We pinpointed that summer slump. What can we add in there to help fill in that forage deficit? We put in Mojo crabgrass. Crabgrass is a warm season annual. It's going to be producing at its peak while the fescue is slowing down and going dormant. So we have filled that gap in. Now we have that fall growth of the tall fescue on the right, but do we want to use that then, or do we want to find something else to help stretch that fescue further in to the winter, late fall, early winter? So we'll fill that growth curve right there with the forage turnip. That turnip will provide feed if seeded at the beginning of August through mid-September into early November, mixed with probably a small grain or an annual ryegrass. It's going to provide forage during that fall month while we're allowing our base forage of tall fescue to grow and able to stockpile it. So then, after we had exhausted the forage turnips, we're able to turn cattle back out onto our stockpile pastures and graze that cool season forage until in the upper Midwest, we get covered in snow and then ultimately start feeding hay. Now, a lot of you are located in the transition zone. We're going to say the central part of the United States. And this isn't going to be a lot different because for most of you, the base forage is going to be fescue already. A lot of people like to utilize that in the stockpiling. So that stockpiled fescue is right there. What are we going to fill in when we're waiting? That's our growth curve with the tall fescue. We still have that summer slump right there in the center. We can add red clover in with that tall fescue. Red clover, maybe along with an alfalfa. Both of those have great summer growth compared to the cool season grass that might help fill in that summer slump. If it's not quite enough, we'll go back with that Mojo crabgrass. That way we have a species out there that is growing at peak during that seasonal deficit. So we have a warm season annual complementing the cool season perennials and helping fill it all in. Now, if you're in the South and you have that warm season base pasture, most time your production is going to be highest in June through September with that warm season, and you're looking to fill out into the cooler months. That can be added by just putting legumes out there with that pasture. Could be filled in the fall with the forage turnup and maybe mixed in with the annual ryegrass that you fill in for the winter and have the ability to rotate around, maybe putting some different grasses on there. So this is not a new concept by any means. There's many universities that work on this, extending those grazing seasons, but positioning those species in the areas that you have forage slumps is just finding a new species to fit that gap and help provide more of an equal forage base throughout the grazing season. But what does all that mean? Well, when you look at it, it's the savings. Because when you run out of forage in your pastures, what are you usually doing? You're going out and purchasing hay or feeding out of your hay stocks, and that is never cheap. So the one thing is, by able to have forages that are available during those slumps and graze them while leaving the hay in the barn for the winter months or different time of year, is definitely going to save. And now this is just my simple cowboy math. Don't anybody please bring up my arithmetic on this, but just the simple factors are is the cost per month per cow. By going out and grazing forages, you can raise on your place or in that seasonal deficit is going to help save around $8 to almost $50 a cow per month. So pinpointing and positioning different species of forage for each of those times. Now selection. We'll hit on the selection mark right now. And I want everybody to look at this picture because on the left, for the last couple months, for all winter, I'm one that loves it also. Everybody's been getting their bull catalogs. Everybody having their sale. And how many people look through that catalog before they go to the sale and start selecting the best genetics? Because in those genetics, you're selecting a bull to breed your cows that is going to perform and help with the overall goals of your operation. He's fit for your environment. He has genetics that are going to perform and improve the profitability of your operation. And everybody knows, everybody's been that guy on the left right there, but how many have been the guy on the right? How many put that time and effort into selecting the proper forage that goes into their fields and taking that time to see if they have the best genetics or the newest improved that's going to help their operation be successful? So with that being said, in selection, just like the cattle industry, the forage industry is the same. They utilize selective breeding, and that breeding has engineered highly specialized breeds of cattle. The same focus is on forage. You look to the dairy cow, to the beef cow, each of those forms is dictated by the utility and the function and what they need, the specialization of improved efficiency and profitability. That dairy cow has been selected to be a milk producer, and that was the main emphasis on that. Below to the right is the beef cow. We have selectively bred to perform better meat animals. If you look at the middle, it's always tough to be profitable if you're milking a Hereford or trying to grass finish a Holstein. Genetics is a big deal in the cattle industry, and it's also in the forage industry. But a lot of times when it comes to grass, the all grass is equal mentality. And I use that mentality to say how many people go to a cattle sale or just order an Angus. I need an Angus, or order a Hereford, or order a Limousine. They don't. They want to find one that fits within that breed that meets their goals for their forage production. And with the focus of a forage breeding program, we always have that quality versus yield. There on the right. We want to have the highest yield, but with that, quality is very important too. Sometimes yielding more isn't always better because you have the emphasis on palatability intake. Does that animal want to eat the forage that's out there, or is it forced to? If they want to consume that forage and it's palatable, then they're going to have higher intake. And if that forage is more digestible, they're able to utilize more of that forage. So the emphasis on forage quality is greater, equal to, if not greater than that yield. But those traditional metrics still apply also, the biomass and the stress tolerance. And we're working from an improved genetic base because working with a company like Barenbrug and all different universities, we have access to plants within a species from all over the world, from the center of diversity in hot, dry, arid areas where we can select a species that has survived that and bring it into a different environment and crossbreed it. We have all of the ability to do that in the forage breeding. Have we had progress in agriculture? If you look on the left is the top producing dairy cow of 1950. On the right, we have today's top producing dairy cow. Not much difference besides about 16, 17,000 units of milk. On the left, we have threshing crew. And on the right, we have a more modern machine. The only difference is what took them to do a day would take a couple minutes for the harvester to do. Advancements have happened in agriculture, and a lot of the grasses that we're using today are almost 80, 90 years old. And they were at the beginning when there's been advancements made and newer genetics out there that we can utilize in our pastures and our forage program. And some of those advancements have been greater range and maturity dates, allowing us a larger window to graze, improved disease resistance. Once again, that better palatability, fiber digestibility of the forage. Another one, drought tolerance and winter hardiness. And one of the more recent advancements has been that of the endophyte technology. utilizing endophytes within plants to help with their persistence and durability. So progress within a species. If you look at these plants, the one on the left and the one on the right, would you call those two different species, or are they the same? Actually, they're the same. They're both tall fescue plants. The one on the right would be a common tall fescue, one such as like Kentucky 31, which is very upright growing, coarse leaved. The one on the left is a soft leaf tall fescue, Bar Optima from Barenberg. That advancement had been made within the species of tall fescue. They both represent the characteristics of traditional tall fescue, very deep rooted, drought tolerant, but the one on the left is much more digestible and palatable than the one on the right. Cattle will seek the one on the left compared to the right. So that advancement has made a better quality forage that cattle will consume by using within that same species, just like we have done with the advancements of cattle genetics. So the difference you can see, and the difference you can see close. Here is an up close. The slide on the left came from the soft leaf tall fescue, while the one on the right came from the traditional coarse leaf tall fescue. As you see, tall fescues have a barb edge along the leaf blade, which actually will deter livestock from consuming it, because I wouldn't want to wrap my tongue around that, but that's the whole theory. Those leaves, if you have tall fescue and you run your fingers backwards across that leaf, you will feel that, if not get cut by it. So a cattle wanting to consume that forage compared to the left, where there's no resistance or puncturing, would be a benefit to the producer. Then we talked a little bit about what is an endophyte. So the endophyte is the fungus that grows within the seed of the plant, the seed that carries all the way through the plant. This is a whole course in itself, but endophytes do a lot for the benefit of the plant, making it hardier, being able to withstand Mother Nature's dynamics of drought, disease, insects. It makes that plant a lot harder. There's wild endophytes that are out there that are good for the plant, but negative for animal performance. Well, there's new advanced endophytes that are still benefiting that plant to give it all the persistence, but do not deter animal performance at all. So taking that, you took all three of those advancements that we just looked at, and those are all put into the Bar Optima plus E34. And how does that affect the producer? Just in these studies that we had done right here. On the left would be the Bar Optima versus Kentucky 31 on stocker cattle, which showed a 59% increase in weight gain. And on the right was done by the University of Missouri at the Southwest Center, where they had done a fall cow-calf pair study by putting them out onto the Bar Optima and traditional tall fescue, as hot Kentucky 31, and showing a significant difference of the cows gaining 1.65 pounds a day more than that on the Kentucky 31, and then on the calves gaining 1.2 pounds more than those on the traditional tall fescue. So that's the economics of the advancements of forage varieties. The same can be said with forage turnips. These turnips weren't bred or selected for the bulb growth, but the forage turnip was selected for the leaf area. This just shows the difference between a common purple top turnip, which is known, and a forage turnip. On the right, you'll see leaf production, which is the main area to be grazed, and a 540% difference in leaf production compared to just the common purple top turnip. The bulbs are going to be the same. There's no difference in the bulbs. All of that difference comes from the selective of more top growth, because we weren't harvesting it for the vegetable, we're harvesting it for the leaf. And the same advancement with forage rape, which is Barsica winter forage rape compared to dwarf Essex, the common type. You're looking at 890 versus 1900 pounds of dry matter pounds per acre. Those are the advancements. And how do we make more of it? Well, we just talked about the improved genetics. The improved genetics, just like you guys in the beef industry, we're focusing on producing a better end product and a more efficient product. The same is happening with these forage varieties also. We're looking for better, more efficient ways to produce forage that can meet the goals of the end user. But with all the best genetics, you need the proper nutrition. Proper nutrition comes with making sure that those plants have what they need to thrive. Soil tests, everybody should do them. I know it's sometimes tough to go out or talk yourself into do it, but at least once every 3 years, get out there in your pastures, take a soil test, know exactly where you stand, because that can answer a lot of questions. And replace nutrients removed. Pretty much, if you're in a grazing situation, the nutrients you're removing are those that go off in the form of milk or beef or bone. And what I got an example of here is if you were to take a cutting hay off. So taking a cutting hay off, you're removing a lot of nutrients from that pasture. So be prepared to replace those. This is just a common grass legume pasture. By taking per ton of hay removed would be 35 units of nitrogen, 15 of P, 50 of K. If you're grazing that, this number varies a little bit, but for average, we'll say you're going to recycle 80% of those nutrients. So you're still removing some in the form that we talked about, whether it's milk or meat or bone. Replace those, feed those pastures, because without the proper nutrition, you'll never be able to get the full potential of the product that you planted. So how do we make more of it? We talked about the improved genetics. We talked about the proper nutrition. And we talked about, now we're going to talk about the better management. And really all three of these, to put it in figurative, is think of a race car and think of the improved genetics of is everything that you can put for the technologies and all of that. But without the motor, it's not going to run. Same thing with the race car on the improved proper nutrition. You can have the fastest car, the best motor, the best technologies, everything in it. Without any fuel, it's not going to run. You have to feed the forage. And then with the management, that comes with our intervention. Us getting the best practices out there. It takes one person to put all of those together for the proper selection, the proper nutrition, and the management is putting all those pieces together to build the best machine or the best race car for that scenario. And that's when I'm just going to touch on the management side of it, because I know Johnny's got a great presentation for all of you, and he has a lot more experience on that side of it. But what I wanted to leave you with was, as far as management, this is from the University of Kentucky. I've got to give Ray Smith and Laura Shore props on making this, but I show this all the time in different presentations, and this can be used. It's simulating continuous grazing over rotational grazing. And this can also be used for making hay off the grass. The plants on the left, you'll see here in a bit, are going to simulate continuous grazing, and that's where they cut it 1 inch out. On the right, they're simulating rotational grazing, taking a little bit, leaving a little bit. And there, they're going to cut this plant at 3.5 inches. And they're doing 5 days in a row of still shots to show you by just leaving a little bit of that leaf area is going to improve the regrowth so dramatically that you will gain forage on that next cutting rather than taking it on the first cutting. And I know in the last webinar, Chris Toyce from Kentucky did a great job of talking about, your leaf area is your solar panel. And when you're dealing with grasses, if you don't have that solar panel to collect the energy, you're slowing the yield down, you're taking the growth away. And this is a great example. So I want everybody just to watch this video and see what the benefits of rotational grazing can be as simple as shutting a gate and giving a pasture a rest. And then we'll just see the difference in the two right here. Already off to a jump start on the right by just 3.5 inches compared to 1 inch. And once again, this is a 5-day period. So on those disc vines or conditioner you're making grass hay with, pick them up a little bit. Don't cut so low. If you're going through a paddock, shut a gate, don't let them behind. That's just a simple management practice that I would recommend. And I want to say thank you to everybody for your time tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Mr. Johnny Rogers and let him continue the talks of management. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you to Barenberg for their sponsorship, and thank you for NCBA for giving me the opportunity to come out and visit with y'all this evening. It's always a pleasure and really a humbling opportunity to talk to what I think are my peers, you know, the farmers and ranchers and beef producers, you know, in this country. So let's just go ahead and get to it, and we'll talk about just some management strategies that we might be able to use to get our forage programs off to a great start. First, just a little bit about myself. As we said in the introduction, you know, my wife and I, we own and operate Rogers Cattle Company in Roxboro, North Carolina. Both of us grew up on beef cattle farms, and we kind of went off through our careers and ended up back into farming. And I farmed for about full time for about 15 years. And we do operate on 100% leased land. So that's kind of unique. And we do try to make, you know, most of what we do a grazing operation. And we like to use a limited amount of equipment. You can see by the name of our operation, we are cattle folks. So we love beef cows. It's our passion. And but you can also see by the enterprise mix that we've used throughout the years that we can be easily distracted by other things. And I kind of say that jokingly, but we have done a lot of things through the years, and there's a reason that some things there have an expiration date. In other words, we don't do those anymore. We can talk about that during the Q&A if you want to, but we do market some pasture-raised meats because we're in a part of the country that can kind of be done. There's good demand for that. We also have a flock of Katahdin hair sheep, and we are a Red Angus seed stock operation. So that's just a little bit about us. And again, I farmed about full time for 15 years. And then I had a midlife crisis moment. And I instead of getting a convertible and a girlfriend, I decided to get a job off the farm because I had an opportunity to go to work for NC State Extension and their amazing grazing program, and I just could not pass that opportunity up to get a chance to work every day with some great colleagues and then some great producers in North Carolina that are just like me. They're excited about grass and grazing management. One of the things we talk about with the amazing grazing is this concept of adaptive grazing management. And my colleague, Dr. Matt Poore, one day he asked me, he said, well, you know, what is adaptive grazing management in your mind? And we sort of had a little conversation about it. And we said, is it intensive grazing? Well, yeah, kind of. Is it mid grazing? Well, you know, maybe. Is it managed grazing? Somewhat. Controlled grazing, mob grazing, strip grazing, yeah, you know, all those things kind of come into play, and some of you might have heard the term regenerative grazing that's out in the press quite a bit, and tactical grazing is something else that we hear a lot about. So how does adaptive grazing play into all of that? Well, I kind of thought about it a little bit, and Dr. Poore challenged me, and he said, you know, what is your definition? So this is the definition that we've come up with that for adaptive grazing management. It's the practice of using proven grazing management principles and practices to meet the dynamic biological, economic, and social needs of individual grazing operations and communities. And I want to point out that it's for individual grazing operations. Unfortunately, we can't have a template that works at our place here in North Carolina and transpose that to Don Schiefelbein's place up in Minnesota. You know, he might use some of the same principles we use, but not the exact same techniques. So I thought for tonight, you know, we could talk for hours about grazing management and how to manage our forages better. So I thought, you know, I've been at this quite a while now, about 20 years. In this grazing management deal, really more than that. But so I thought, what are my top 5 forage management practices that I'd like to share with you this evening? So here they are. And we'll spend some time going through each one of these. And again, we'll just kind of be able to give a 30,000 foot view. But if we need to dig a little deeper, we'll have a chance for some Q&A toward the end. So first of all, let's talk about stocking rate management. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time with grazing terminology, but I do want to make sure that we're all together on our farms and ranches have a certain carrying capacity. And that's basically the amount of forage that we can produce on our place. And it's kind of that maximum stocking rate where we can achieve animal performance. We can also take care of our forages to make sure they're going to be sustainable over time, and it's not going to deteriorate, our soils or anything else. So that's kind of the maximum stocking rate we can have. And probably for most grazing operations, we probably need to have a true stocking rate that is just under that. And stocking rate is, that number of animals, or really it's better to look at the number of pounds of live weight present on our farms and ranches on an annual basis. And the reason I like to think about it in terms of weight is this a little project that we've started in North Carolina where we went out into some herds and we're actually weighing some cows, taking weaning weights on some calves. And the point I want to make here is you start breaking those cows down into different weight categories, and you look at the relative percentage of those cows that occur in these herds. We've got more cows that weigh more than 1,400 pounds than we do that weigh less than 1,200 pounds. So our cows have gotten pretty big. I don't think that'll probably surprise anybody on this call, but so when you start to think about stocking rate and getting that set on your farm, you really need to think about the live weight of your cattle, and you also need to think about the milking potential and the growth potential, because all of those will affect dry matter intake. And obviously that's what we're looking at as far as forage utilization goes. As Luke kind of mentioned, forage rest period is really important. And that's the reason we need to think about having the appropriate stocking rate. So we can make sure we've got the right number of cows or the right weight of cows on our place. We can make sure that we can set up a grazing rotation where we never come back on that grazed forage too soon. We need to wait until it's ready to be grazed again. That's going to vary, depending on the time of the year and the species that we have. You can see here with the photo, obviously properly grazed forage will be able to sustain a more robust root system, which can feed and help us build soil health. And it can also help us as we go into maybe some inclement weather conditions such as drought. We're able to pull those nutrients and water from deeper into the soil profile. Luke also mentioned that Chris Deutsch talked about the solar panel, that leaf area that captures that solar energy and really makes this whole thing work. It makes our whole planet work if you think about it. And, Jim Garish here, I love this quote. We've got 43,560 square feet of solar panel. That's really what we've got to manage. And I always like to add that we've got that same area to collect water. And that kind of ties back in. We won't spend a tremendous amount of time talking about soil health, but if we get the forage managed correctly, we can build better soil health that'll get more water infiltrating into our soils to help us feed our plants, to help us grow more forage, and that's really what we want to do. So the whole system can kind of work together. Okay, so that's kind of our stocking rate. The second thing I wanted to share with you tonight is a concept called the power of one wire. And this really kind of plays into the use of temporary electric fence. And you'll see here, this is a pasture, actually a pasture on our farm. And you can see kind of outlined in blue that would just be a high tensile electric fence. And there's a water tank over here toward the bottom of the screen. And then that white dot is a temporary fiberglass fence post that I'll kind of show you a picture of here in a bit. But anyway, we put that fiberglass fence post in, and we run a temporary poly wire and some step-in posts across this field, and basically we just kind of cut it in half. And then to get current on that, we'll just tie that into our electric fence, and all this is set up on a temporary basis. And then we'll introduce our cow herd. This one cow would represent many cows, and you would have this cow over here, and you can see I like red cows, so that's why the cow's red. And so we turn them into this half of this pasture, and they've got shade. We've got a salt and mineral feeder out there. They've got water that they have access to. They've got grass. So we will let them graze this forage down to the target height. And then we will go out and get ready to move those cows. And as cows it doesn't take them long to kind of understand what's going on here. So they'll come over here and kind of see what you're up to. And you're going to roll that fence up. And then they're going to go over here to the fresh grass, and then you're going to move that to the other side of the water tank. Well, now you've got shade, you moved your mineral feeder, you've got water, and you've got grass. So what just happened here with this power of one wire? Well, theoretically, we doubled our stock density. We didn't talk about stock density here, but just believe me that anytime we increase stock density, it could be a good thing. We know that we increased our rest period. We've already talked about that and how important that is. The other thing is you learned how to use temporary electric fence and how to make it work on your farm in a very simple fashion of just splitting this larger pasture in half. This is about a 20-acre pasture. The other thing you did is you taught your cattle how to respect temporary electric fence and how it can be used, and that can be very important. So here's kind of those tools for adaptive grazing, and you can see that poly wire is comes on a reel there, and that picture on the top right hand, that is a Gallagher reel. We really like those. That's a fiberglass fence post that I talked about on the previous slide. Sometimes water becomes an issue, and we need to develop better water sources on our farm. Sometimes that will be permanent. Sometimes it'll be portable. It's always good to have a four-wheeler or a UTV to carry things around. And really, when you start thinking about adaptive grazing, really you're only limited by your imagination. So it really pays to have a good open mind. The thing that really makes this interesting using this temporary electric fence is once cattle are trained that the electric fence is something to be respected, you can use it a lot of different ways. And one of the things that we do is we will use that to sort cattle out of a larger group. In fact, I did that this morning. I need to pull about 5 cows out of a group of about 60, and I use this similar technique. But in this example, this arrow would kind of show you our corral. My alternative here would be to bring all of those cattle into that corral, sort out the ones I need, and then turn them all back out. And even using low stress techniques, it would stress that group of cattle a little bit by getting them up. So why not just go out there, get the one I need? Let's say here's one that's maybe got a little sore foot or a little pink eye. And we can, my wife can get on one end of that temporary electric fence. I'm on the other end of it, and we can just start moving that cow. There's no electricity on the fence. We're just moving it, holding it between us. We can take the cow to the gate, get her treated, and turn her back out. And you can say, well, that's an interesting description there, but does it actually work in real life? It does work in real life. This is Dr. Matt Poore and his nephew pulling out a steer that needed to be treated a few winters ago. So yes, it actually does work. And the thing that a lot of people really don't understand is how cattle will respect this, even in a corral or a catch pen. It would take several people to get this group of cattle to walk up through that gate that leads up to their chute and their working facility. Or you could have just Dr. Poore, his nephew, and a single poly wire, and those cattle just resign themselves that said, well, there's that poly wire. We better just go ahead and go in there. And I think if it was just the two of them, it would take a whole lot more time, probably more pressure, and probably more stressful situation for both the people and the cattle. So the temporary electric fence can be very useful. So really better forage production is really only the beginning of the power of one wire and of adaptive grazing. It's all those other benefits. That's what makes this one wire so powerful. Once you learn how to use it and harness it and train your cattle, you can use it in a lot of different ways. You can use it to treat cattle and, use very high animal welfare standards. And I even tie it into BQA here as far as our training programs. It allows you to get out onto your pastures. You stay in touch with the soils, the whole ecology of pasture systems. A lot of our producers talk about it's a great lifestyle and family activity. It's something they do with their spouse or with their children. And it is a lot safer because we typically are only using lighter equipment or no equipment at all. It does allow you to improve the way that you handle your livestock. You can run that temporary electric fence around hot spots. An example of that would be I had a water line bust one time, and the cattle found it during the summertime and made a nice big mud hole there, of course, before I could get it fixed. So I just ran a poly wire around it and let that area kind of rest and stabilize a little bit. And I went in and reseeded it then. We can also go in and preserve some pasture shade. We need shade in this part of the country, so we like to protect our trees. So we can do that with temporary electric fence versus, something more permanent. Also, if we have ice storms, we have hurricanes, a lot of events that can damage our fences. If your cattle are trained to electric fence, it can be a good thing. So again, the Power One wire is the key to adaptive grazing management. Okay, one of the other things I wanted to share is stockpiling forages and extending the grazing season. This is probably, it may be one of my top favorite practices, forage management practices, because all forages can be stockpiled. The difference is how long they can be stockpiled before they're actually utilized and how they hold their nutritional value. It's excellent nutrition. You're dealing with a rested plant, so we know a recovered plant is kind of what we want. It helps build soil health. Nutrient distribution can be managed, and it's good ground cover. And again, it's kind of kid friendly, I like to call it, because you are using the limited equipment. Those of you in the fescue belt are very familiar with this. You can select a fescue field in the fall. You can graze that down or clip it down to 3 to 4 inches and then add some nitrogen. Or maybe you don't need to add nitrogen. There's some really interesting research coming out of NC State and Dr. Alan Franzluber's about if you have good soil health and good mineralizable nitrogen in your soils, you may not need to add that supplemental nitrogen because it's already in your soils. We found that for the best yield, sometime late August, mid-September is a good time to start stockpiling. If you really want to have a high quality stockpile, you can start stockpiling a little bit later. And, consider your livestock nutritional requirements based on picking that date for stockpiling. And maybe you do some of both. Maybe you stockpile some a little longer. Some you start stockpiling a little later in the fall for better quality. If it's a dry fall, we'll use split nitrogen applications, or we will go ahead and buy other feedstuffs. We like to utilize our stockpile grasses in 1 to 3 day moves using that temporary electric fence, again, the Power of One wire. And we will graze stockpile that contains our clover and maybe other grasses first, and save those heavy fescue, predominantly fescue fields, for a little bit later. Feeding some hay is something we like to do to stretch our stockpile, and it kind of tightens the cows up a little bit, because this is very good quality feed going through our cattle. And I always like to say, if you've got a brood cow operation or ewes or does, I think this is a practice you really need to be using. Some work done by Dr. Poor here at NC State a few years ago. In fact, we were a cooperating producer on this project. You can see the TDN value of the stockpile fescue and how it holds all the way into March, and it's still better than the hay that we could have been feeding. So again, this stockpile fescue offers us very high quality feed going into our cattle. This is a picture of some of our cows. Again, we're feeding some dry hay, along with giving them a strip of stockpile to maintain our cows and calves going through the winter. If you're not in the fescue belt, if you're down in the Bermuda grass areas of the country, if Bermuda grass or bahia is your top forage, then this is going to look very similar to stockpiling tall fescue. The difference is we're going to graze that in the early or late fall, early winter time frame, because it will not hold its quality as deep into the winter as fescue does. But if you're in Bermuda grass country, as Luke said, you also have the advantage of using cool season annual forages to interseed in that Bermuda grass. So I'm thinking, if I was in Bermuda grass country, I might stockpile some Bermuda as kind of a bridge to I could graze my cows on before I got to my winter annuals. So just something to think about, and a strategy that could work for a lot of folks. I talked about nutrient distribution, and when you use that strip grazing technique, grazing these stockpile forages, for every $1 that goes in a cow's mouth, about 85 cents of it's going to go somewhere on your farm. And this allows you to put that 85 cents where it will help you grow more forage the next year and on into the future. Okay, the next practice is incorporating legumes. And I think this is one that will really probably hit home with a lot of people. adding those clovers to fescue type pastures, or maybe using some annual legumes in your Bermuda grass overseeds can just be very effective. We can improve animal performance. We can increase yield. We know that these legumes are going to add nitrogen to the system over time, and it can be very valuable, especially with higher fertilizer prices that a lot of us are going to face. And it is a practice that I would certainly highly recommend. If you look at why legumes are so important, I think if you kind of take a look at this, this particular graph, and it kind of shows you the quality of different types of forage species. Your warm season tropical grasses, either the perennials or the annuals, typically are lower quality, and that would be on the right side of the graph. And then you look at your cool season perennials and cool season annuals are a little higher quality, and your legumes really bump that quality up and allow us, if we have a class of animals that have really high production, maybe some, lactating cows, stocker calves, or maybe even a pasture-based finishing program, we need to incorporate those legumes to make sure we can keep the performance high on our cattle. If you're dealing with fescue toxicosis, grazing Kentucky 31 tall fescue, man, using red and white clover is just a great combination to help you increase weaning weights. And especially if you've got spring calving cows on those fescue pastures, you can really bump the conception rates up a considerable amount. Again, this was done back in the 80s in Indiana. This is something we've known for a long time, but I still think this is a practice we don't use enough of. A little bit about how to use our incorporate our legumes. I like to use a frost seeding technique, and that's where you kind of take maybe some of your fields that have been grazed pretty close, like your stockpile fields. Make sure they're adequate, for pH and phosphorus index, and then don't apply nitrogen to those fields. If you're in the habit of applying nitrogen to your fescue pastures, don't do that. Go ahead and frost seed those legumes. Again, I would recommend red and white clover. In our part of the country, sometime mid-February into March would be a good time to broadcast that. And I'll kind of show you the equipment on the next slide. And then it's important, once you get that broadcast out there, that you manage those fields, you manage the fertility, you mow it or graze it, and keep that grass grazed shorter that first year, and give that clover a chance to get established. If you just let the grass blow up, it'll kind of outcompete those clover seedlings. And then use rotational grazing to maintain that clover, and it will kind of stay in the stand for a good while. I know it looks like I'm playing to my sponsor here a little bit, but this was just a picture I had. We've used the Bardura red clover, and we like it a lot. And actually, this other picture that the pickup truck, you can see the yellow seed on the bumper there. That would be Mojo crabgrass. So we are a customer of Barenberg. We like their products, and they work for us very well. So let's talk a little bit about using annual forages and how they might work for our systems. They can be established many different ways, from a conventional type grain drill with a little soil disturbance or sod disturbance to a no-till drill. And we've already talked, or Luke did a good job, I think, of talking about this. And, we've got our cool season perennials, which I think are kind of the meat and potatoes, along with the warm season perennials, depending on where you are. And again, I've kind of got this label for the southeastern U.S. Cool season annuals will obviously play a big role in a lot of this systems, as well as our warm season annuals during the summer. Some cover crops that we have used and tried on our operations, again, I call them cover crops because they are used in a lot of cropping systems, and really it's just grazing annuals, either cool or warm seasons. All of those can be grazed, and they will do a great job of providing a rest period for our perennial pastures, so it can give you a good quality forage to get you off your perennial pastures. It can improve biological activity on cropland or on pastures that you're wanting to renovate, and it can improve soil organic matter. Livestock will remove this high quality forage pretty quickly, especially those winter annuals, those cool season annual cover crops. Strip grazing is a good way to use that, using temporary electric fence. Again, the power of one wire can kind of help us utilize that forage. Just some thoughts on what you should plant. There's a lot of options out there, and you know, there's some very simple mixes, you know, maybe 2 species like oats and crimson clover, or Sudan grass and cowpeas during the summer. We try to get something out of each functional group, maybe a grass, legume, and a broadleaf, you know, something like the Marquette turnip works very well. Seeding rates typically are a little bit higher on grazing systems than they would be just for traditional cropping, you know, cover crop systems. And, you know, seeding rate per foot of row versus seeding rate per square foot. Again, I think there's a lot of things here we kind of need to understand. There's some folks that just drill it one way, and then there's some will come back and cross drill. A lot of folks, you know, question the use of glyphosate to burn down the existing vegetation. I found it to be very beneficial to help get your cover crop established. But again, each operation kind of needs to make that own decision for themselves. These winter annuals, you know, again, Luke talked about some of these, but on the grass side, you got oats, wheat, rye, triticale, ryegrass, and plenty of legumes to choose from, as well as some forbs, or, you know, like our barcamp turnips can work very well. If you go into the summertime and you want to utilize some summer annual forages, sorghum Sudan grass, we find work very well in a lot of areas. The millets really fill in really good. Also, sunflower can be great for pollinator habitats. Cowpeas and sun hemp are 2 that we have used as far as summer legumes. There's not as many legumes in the summer warm season forages as there are the cool season. And of course, the same brassicas can work during the summertime. We still use temporary fence. We will knock down a path and we'll put up temporary fence so we can strip graze these annual forages, and both summer and winter. So there's my fabulous 5, or my favorite 5 forage management practices. I think if you take a look at your stocking rate, and you can work with extension and NRCS in your state, and you can determine the correct stocking rate for your farms. And again, make sure you put that on a live animal basis so you can account for not only your mama cows, but replacement heifers or stocker calves that you might have. I hope that I've made a case tonight for the use of power of one wire and the use of temporary electric fence. I really think it's something that can be a fundamental shift. Again, it doesn't mean you have to move cattle every day. You may only move cattle once a week, but if you just took your pastures, your existing pastures today, and maybe cut them in half, it can help you utilize and grow more forage. Stockpile forage is, again, one of my all-time favorite practices. If you're in the fescue belt, it's really a no-brainer to go ahead and do that. Bring that nitrogen into your forage system with the legumes. Again, it's simple to do with frost seeding, and it can build soil health and help feed the soil microbiology. Same goes for using annual forages. Again, it's just a great way to jumpstart some of these pastures that maybe need renovation, and maybe your annual forages will be part of a renovation step, maybe going from a Kentucky 31 tall fescue to something like a Bar Optima E34. Annual forages can be part of that step and be something that can be very beneficial. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening, and I look forward to the questions and from the group. So I will turn it back over to Don. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Johnny and Luke. What an outstanding job both of you have done. And Johnny, thanks for working in Barenbrug there, USA seeds there. We use them here as well, and we thank you for your sponsorship very much, Luke, here tonight. I hope everybody who's watched this presentation clearly sees that NCBA is all about bringing the latest relevant information to our members in the industry. Both of our presenters certainly did an outstanding job achieving that goal here tonight. As we move into the question and answer session, if you are a member of NCBA, we thank you for your support very much. If not, please consider joining NCBA at ncba.org. We sure could use your support. Also, be sure to sign up for our last webinar in this series, Grazing Tools of the Trade. Registration is open at ncba.org, once again under the Producer tab. Now let's get to your questions. Thank you again for participating in the webinar tonight. I'll hand it over to Michaela, NCBA staff, to moderate the questions and answers. Michaela, take it away.
Thanks, Don, and thank you to our presenters for providing such excellent content. Before we get to our questions, I just wanted to mention our third and final webinar in this series. It will take place April 22nd at 7 p.m. Central Time. So be sure to register for our third and final webinar for this series at the producer tab at ncba.org. There will also be a recording for this webinar as well as our part 1 that will be available on the also on the producer tab and our YouTube channel, Cattlemen's Webinar Series. So I just want to mention, if we don't get to your question tonight, I will go ahead and collect your email and we can forward those along to the speakers. So don't be afraid to utilize that chat box. And with that, we'll just dive right into some questions. So, Luke, you mentioned that you're a big advocate for soil tests and proper nutrition. Well, we've had a couple producers chime in here with the lower profit margins today. We've gotten a couple questions on fertilizer and the amount of fertilizer usage that a soil test calls for. So I didn't know if you could speak to that, if you had any thoughts or recommendations, if a producer should apply the recommended amount of fertilizer on the soil test. And then Johnny, this is kind of a two-part question. Johnny, feel free to also chime in here with what are some of the most cost-effective ways to replace those nutrients that have been removed?
Okay, thank you. I'll start that. The answer with that question is not all soil tests are created equal. Some of them are skewed towards maybe grain production more, and you really need to know what you're measuring on that. Recommended amounts, that is usually kind of a crapshoot on a lot of soil tests, but what I was talking about was more of the removal rate, which you know you're removing. If you're not familiar with the ground that you're working with, then that's really where you need the soil test and to see where you're off. Does all of it need to be applied at once? No, would be my answer, but to slowly build up, because you're not going to reach the potential of the forage you're growing there until you have a good balanced nutritional base as far as in the soil. So I don't know if I directly answered, because every region is different, and like I said, all soil tests tend to be different also. So it's good to work with your extension agents and take the proper soil tests that they're used to working with and have them kind of decipher it for you. But does everything need to be applied at once? No, I would say not. Now I'll let Johnny answer it.
Yeah, I think Luke's spot on that. I know a lot of the state labs, Department of Agriculture or universities, they will, for phosphorus and potassium, they will actually measure that, determine what's available in your soil sample. And on those two nutrients, as a farmer, I have to put on my farmer hat here and do what's realistic. There might be a right answer, but I know what farmers are going to do. I think over time, you need to try to get that, phosphorus and potassium build up into your soil. And there's a lot of different ways to do that besides fertilizer. Maybe some bale grazing, feeding in those areas, unrolling hay, can add some of that. But if it's your hay ground, obviously you are kind of tied into to commercial fertilizer, or maybe some type of animal manure. So phosphorus and potassium, I would try to get those up over time. Now nitrogen, the nitrogen recommendation that most labs are going to give you is going to be based on what the actual crop can actually utilize. So it might be 100 to 150 pounds, of nitrogen might be the recommendation. I would never recommend putting on 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen at one time, and maybe not even over a whole year, but because it's probably not economically feasible to do that. And I mentioned Dr. Franzlib for some of the work he's doing. He's trying to tie the need for nitrogen to a soil health assessment. So if you have good biological soil activity, you will not need near as much nitrogen. He's got some interesting data to kind of back that up with. So Luke hit it spot on. Not every soil test is created equal. So again, work with your extension folks and maybe NRCS or Department of Ag in some states and try to arrive at something that's logical. But I usually try to not put on any more than 50 units of nitrogen at a time, 30 to 50 units. That way you're never overwhelming the soil microbiology with a big slug of nitrogen. So.
Well, those are excellent recommendations and advice. So can either of you or both chime in here, speak to how to control weed growth?
I guess I'll start with that. For weed growth, I always kind of look at if you were to pack a room full of people, no one else can come in. And if all those people are the grasses and beneficial forages, that's the best way to control weed growth, is to have that dense sward out there. But now if you remove a couple of people, that opens the area for weeds to come in. And so to deter weeds is to keep a healthy stand. And just like, that video I had showed with the continuous grazing over the rotational grazing, when you're doing continuous grazing, you're growing that down and you have a bunch grass, maybe not so much a sod, you graze it down to that bunch, that opens a lot of soil up. And once the soil's bare, that's where a weed can pop in. That, besides chemical suppression, but there's advancements in the works and all of that to be able to maybe take care of some broadleaves and not affect our clover. But right now, we're kind of tied into, if we're doing that, we might be taking out some legumes in our pasture. So the proactive approach to it is to keep a good, healthy pasture that has plenty of growth on it to not expose the soil, and that'll keep from weeds encroaching on the pasture. Past that, there's different techniques, and maybe Johnny has an answer for that.
I won't add a whole lot to that, but I do think that's correct. Focus on growing more grass and less on controlling weeds, and usually the weeds will take care of themselves. The other thing I would do is I would actually go out and take some objective measurements from your field. One thing we do is we use what we call the point step technique. Is we'll walk around, randomly in a field, and about every 10 paces, we'll look at what's touching a point on our shoe, and we'll write down what that is. Is it something that's favorable, unfavorable, or is it a weed, or some type of grass? So we're kind of doing an inventory of our pastures, because if we're not careful, you'll go out there and you won't have a weed problem, but you're going to see a lot of weeds, but you still may not have a weed problem in that it's not affecting your yield that much. So make sure you get some objective data before you go out and you reach for some of the other tools. And again, there's a lot of good herbicides out there we can use and getting better all the time, and some coming that will be clover safe, they say. So there's a lot of good options, but again, that's probably getting out of my area of expertise. We use a lot of those products. They do work very well, and I'll leave it at that.
Those are some great recommendations. Johnny, this question is specifically for you. So you mentioned that your operation is 100% leased ground, correct?
Yes.
So with that, we see some pushback that we hear from some folks about the lack of incentive to implement grazing strategies that may seem too complicated, since it's land that they don't personally own. I just didn't know if you could speak to that or say any thoughts about that.
Yeah, and I can kind of understand that. If it's a year-to-year lease, that I could see that. We typically get our leases in 5 years at a time, and so we got some time to implement some of that. Plus, we've been here 20 years, on the principal piece of land that we operate on, and we take care of it like we're going to be here for 100 more. And I really believe that if you can't just go out and do everything, but if you can get a good long-term, a medium to long-term lease, And on some of these shorter term leases, maybe try some things like incorporating legumes, and show your landlords, and some landowners will respond to the care that you give their land. I know our landowners, they really like to kind of hear what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it has worked out really well. Now, I know it won't work that way for everyone. And it is unusual for you to, stay on a place as long as we have, and we're probably lucky, and I'll take that luck. It's been okay. But we've also taken care of the land again like it's our own, and like we're going to be here for a very long time, and it's worked out. But I know it won't always work out that way, but try to find those lower cost things you can do. Maybe you can put in some of these grazing practices with some temporary electric fence that you can take with you, or even some permanent, semi-permanent high tensile fence. You can put in some of these, structures that part of the agreements, you take it with you when you leave. So again, you couldn't put in a lot of infrastructure, but you could put in some.
That's really great advice for our producers. Here's another question for you, Johnny. So loved hearing about the power of one wire and how that can just help with cattle handling and those BQA practices pertaining to health and welfare. But just a couple questions about the logistics. So how long does it take to move one wire? Do you set up a new wire, then take the existing wire down and let the cows move forward, or what are some of the logistics?
Yeah, that's hard to really answer. It would depend on the size of your field. A typical reel, the reels that hold the poly wire, they make some of those that are 1-to-1 reels that, you turn the handle one time, the spool turns one time. Then they make some that are 3-to-1 geared reels. Well, the 3-to-1 geared reel offers a tremendous advantage in terms of time. And really what I try to get folks to, if you're just getting started using temporary electric fence, like that example I showed, just take that 20-acre field and cut it roughly in half, where, at the water source, and that will kind of get you started. And then the next time you come around that field after, a few months or something, you might say, well, I'm going to break this field up into 4 segments this time. Again, just around that one water source. So we didn't have to change our water or anything else. It'd be a pie-shaped, a deal, or maybe some temporary lanes. So if you use those temporary fencing tools, and the reason we use those fiberglass posts is because they can turn a corner. You can take sideways pressure. So it's like a temporary corner post. And, that's something that my wife, she is, 100 pounds soaking wet in a bear suit. She can utilize all of the fencing tools that we have. She puts it up, takes it down. And it's not as time consuming as you might think. If you have other things going on, like if you're have an off the farm job, put up some temporary fence on the weekends, and then maybe just take it down when you get home in the evenings, from your off the farm job. And then the next weekend you put all the temporary fence up in another pasture, So again, think about that temporary fence, just ways you could use it to fit your schedule. That's the adaptive grazing management part. Remember I said there's a social aspect to this too. That social aspect is you. What can you do? As far as grazing management, sometimes you might move cattle every day. Sometimes you might move them once a week or once a month. It's adaptive, and it fits your system, so it has to fit you. And it's, so again, I hope that rambling kind of gets it cleared up a little bit. If not, yes, shoot me an email. We'll talk more about it.
Yep, definitely. A couple of the unanswered questions we'll definitely forward along to you guys. Luke, I'm going to save the last question for you. We seem to have several Barenbrug enthusiasts on the line. So are there any new forage varieties or legumes that are on the horizon for us?
Yeah, there's always things on the horizon. There's some really exciting things down the pipeline right now. Like I said, with the addition of a lot of endophytes we're putting into perennial ryegrasses and tall fescues. Those are in the pipeline. Also, we are releasing a brand new softleaf tall fescue. Along with last year, we'd had a new late maturing orchard grass and plenty of new products coming down the pipeline.
Well, that's excellent to hear. We're excited to hear about that. So with that, we'll wrap up our Q&A portion. And I'll allow both of you to just any parting thoughts or closing comments that that either of you can share. Johnny, if you have anything to share, or Luke, please feel free to share one last tidbit of wisdom for us.
Yeah, I'll go first, then Luke, you can clean it up. Biggest thing I would want to leave the producers with on the line is just pick something new and try. You know, maybe it's a Barenberg product. You know, maybe it's Bardura Red Clover or something like that. Maybe it's it's using some temporary electric fence on your farm. Just pick one management practice and see how it could work on your farm. It may work, it may not, but just don't be afraid to try something new. Thanks again for having me.
Go ahead.
Yes, just in closing, I just wanted to once again say thank you to Johnny and also to NCBA for helping put on these webinars. It's been great to have these educational events. And like I said in my talk, I look forward for everybody getting together in Nashville. And if anybody's there, just feel free to stop by and say hi. Love to talk to you.
Great. Thank you both so much for your comments. That was some great information. We appreciate all the effort and time that you've put into these presentations, and for taking time out of your busy schedules for us. And thank you, Mr. Don Schiefelbein, for also jumping on with us. It was really enjoyable, and I look forward to Nashville as well. So for everyone that is still with us, don't forget to go on and register for our part 3. And with that, I hope everyone has a great evening.